Caiaphas, the high priest of Jerusalem, played a crucial role in the trial and crucifixion of Jesus Christ, seeking to preserve his position of power and the delicate political balance with Rome. By devising a plot to silence Jesus' message, Caiaphas believed he was protecting the religious order, but he ended up triggering a spiritual transformation that would change the world forever. The temple veil torn at the moment of the crucifixion symbolized the collapse of the system he fought to maintain, while the resurrection of Christ marked a victory that challenged his authority and exposed the fragility of his legacy. But what was the final fate of Caiaphas after these events? Discover how this epic story unfolds and how the high priest faced the consequences of his choices. Don't miss the revealing ending. Welcome to the channel Secret Verses. Prepare for a new Bible teaching, where together we will reveal precious lessons for your lives. Join us until the end and discover the secrets that God has reserved for you. Sign up for the channel. Number 1. Annas and Caiaphas, planners of a future. Annas and Caiaphas, two names that resonate in history, loaded with dominance and influence, but also darkness and controversy. They were not just religious leaders, they were the creators of a project that would transform the course of a nation. These individuals, immersed in power, were at the center of the most important and dark events in the history of Jerusalem. His actions are seen in every decision made, in every phrase murmured in the council of priests. But who really were these men and what led them to act as they did? Annas, the patriarch, a man who, although he did not hold the position of official high priest at the time, held in his hands the invisible strings of influence. In John 18 verse 13 we read that, after being captured, Jesus was taken first to Annas, before anyone else. This highlights the relevance of Annas, who, even without office, led with a silent but decisive influence. Annas was admired and feared, a leader whose decisions had repercussions on the entire religious structure. On the other hand, we have Caiaphas, son-in-law of Annas and official high priest of the time. This man, who formerly possessed the power, made a statement that sounded like one sentence: "A man must die for the people," John 11 verse 50. His words, spoken with calculated coldness, became a grim prediction that would determine the fate of Jesus. Caiaphas, with his practical vision, perceived the death of Jesus not only as a political solution, but as a necessity to sustain the status quo, to protect the stability of a system that was on the verge of collapse. The relationship between Annas and Caiaphas was more than just kinship, it was a coalition of dominance, a strategic union that controlled not only the temple, but the future of many lives. Together they formed an alliance that navigated the tortuous paths of politics and religion, always alert to what could compromise their position. Number 2. Annas, the hidden leader behind the scenes. The capture of Jesus, carried out under his direction, was the first step in a plan that was intended to be quick and discreet, but which in reality would unleash a succession of events with unpredictable repercussions. And so, while the city rested, these two men hatched a dark plan. But what led Annas and Caiaphas to make those decisions? And how would the episodes they devised definitively change the course of history? Annas, although he had already been removed from the position of high priest, still maintained a veiled influence, as a behind-the-scenes driver in politics and religion. What many do not know is that, even without the official title, Annas remained a central figure directing the course of the council of priests. In John 18 verse 24, we see that after being questioned by Annas, Jesus was transferred to Caiaphas. This detail reveals the directive hand of Annas, who, even without the exposure of other leaders, supported a network of influence that few dared to confront. Annas's influence was so strong that his sons, one after another, assumed the position of high priest. But it was Annas who coordinated the most crucial decisions. He was the first to interrogate Jesus, trying to identify some defect, some reason that could serve to condemn him. This initial investigation, conducted confidentially, away from public view, was a strategic move. Annas knew that Jesus' destiny was already defined, but he needed something concrete, something that could be used to influence the council and ensure that his will prevailed. Number 3. Annas' impatience. As the night progressed, Annas insisted, trying to destabilize Jesus, looking for some vulnerability. But Jesus, serene and confident, did not offer the reaction that Annas expected. Jesus' silence, his brief and objective answers, made Annas impatient. However, for him truth or fairness were not priorities. Annas was committed to protecting the status quo, to ensuring that nothing threatened the order that he and his family had so built and defended. When Annas realized that he would not achieve what he wanted, he sent Jesus to Caiaphas, trusting that his son-in-law, with his usual coldness, would complete the task. But Annas' influence did not end there. Even after handing Jesus over to Caiaphas, he remained attentive to events, prepared to intervene if anything was beyond his control. He knew that, to secure Jesus' condemnation, it would be necessary to obtain the approval not only of the council, but also of the population. And to achieve this, every step, every choice, had to be meticulously planned. Annas then paved the way for Caiaphas, ensuring that the witnesses were coordinated and that the accusations were well articulated. He was fully aware that, before Caiaphas, Jesus would face more than a simple test. He would face a premeditated sentence. Annas' purpose was evident: to silence the voice that so many were beginning to hear, to protect the power that his lineage possessed, and to ensure that nothing and no one would question the position they had achieved. Number 4. Caiaphas in the process. Caiaphas, the acting priest, was not only a religious leader, but a skilled strategist, capable of making decisions that, for many, would be unimaginable. When he received Jesus from the hands of Annas, he understood that this moment required more than an ordinary test. Caiaphas did not seek the truth. Their main objective was to preserve power and prevent any insurrection that Jesus' growing fame might provoke. Jesus, in the presence of Caiaphas, was not considered just a man, but a direct threat to the established order. With this thought, Caiaphas directed the process. He knew he needed a solid accusation, something to back up the death sentence he had already determined in his mind. So, he asked the question that was not only intended to be a confession, but also a statement that could be used against Jesus. In Matthew 26 verses 63 to 64, Caiaphas questioned whether Jesus was the Christ, the Son of God. Jesus' response, stating that they would see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power, was enough for Caiaphas. At that moment, he tore his clothes, an act of indignation that inflamed the council, thus ensuring Jesus' condemnation. Number 5. Manipulation of the words and sentence of Jesus. However, this reaction of Caiaphas was not simply an impulse of anger, it was a meticulously planned strategy on the board of his power. He understood that he needed more than statements to ensure Jesus' execution. He needed a reason to justify his surrender to the Romans, something that Pilate could not rule out. Thus, by manipulating Jesus' statements, Caiaphas turned a spiritual statement into a political threat. For Caiaphas, Jesus was not just a blasphemer, he was an instigator, someone capable of provoking a revolt against Roman rule. Caiaphas's cunning in handling the situation and distorting the words to suit his interests demonstrates not only his sagacity, but also the depth of his moral corruption. He was willing to sacrifice an innocent man to secure his position and that of the council. As the trial progressed, Caiaphas continued to manipulate witnesses, leading the council toward the outcome he had already planned. Their goal was clear: bring Jesus to execution, not only to eliminate a threat but also to convey a message to anyone who dared challenge the temple's supremacy. Number 6. The connection with Pilate and the surrender of Jesus. Caiaphas understood that the support of the council alone would not be enough to ensure the condemnation of Jesus. He needed the approval of Pilate, the Roman governor, and to do so he turned the accusation of blasphemy into an accusation of insubordination to the empire. In Luke 23 verse 2, the council, under the leadership of Caiaphas, presented Jesus to Pilate, accusing him of inciting the people to rebellion and proclaiming himself king of the Jews. This change in the accusation was fundamental, since, for the Romans, claiming kingship without the permission of Rome was a serious infraction, which posed a direct threat to Caesar's power. Pilate, reluctant at first, faced a crowd instigated by the priests, who demanded the crucifixion of Jesus. What followed was a dynamic of manipulation and pressure, in which Caiaphas and the other religious leaders, supported by the crowd, forced Pilate to act. The accusation of treason against the Roman Empire was the key piece of the plan that Caiaphas had meticulously devised. He knew that Pilate could not ignore a risk to the dominion of Rome, and with this maneuver he managed to have Jesus condemned. Number 7. The sentence and the path to the cross. With the death sentence set, Jesus was handed over for crucifixion. Caiaphas's influence remained visible, ensuring that the entire process followed his intentions. In John 19 verse 19, Pilate ordered the inscription "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews" to be placed on the cross. This ironic choice, although intended to ridicule, ended up stating exactly what Jesus' followers believed to be true. On the road to Golgotha, Jesus carried his cross, followed by a crowd made up of both his opponents and those impacted by his message. Every step he took reflected the plan that Caiaphas had led, but it also indicated that something transcendent was at stake. For Caiaphas, it was essential to ensure that Jesus' crucifixion was final and beyond challenge. He ordered that the bodies be removed from the crosses before the Sabbath, according to John 19 verse 31, preserving ceremonial purity and preventing any public disturbance. However, as Caiaphas concentrated on carrying out the rituals, something extraordinary happened. The temple veil was torn from top to bottom at the moment of Jesus' death, Matthew 27 verse 51, a significant symbol of a profound and unexpected spiritual transformation. Number 8. The guarded tomb and the resurrection. After the crucifixion, Caiaphas and the other religious leaders were determined to prevent fraud from being committed regarding the body of Jesus. They asked Pilate to set guards to watch the tomb and make sure the disciples did not try to steal the body and claim that he had been resurrected. In Matthew 27 verses 62 to 66, it is reported that a large stone was placed at the entrance to the tomb and that Roman soldiers were tasked with protecting it. This precaution was intended to prevent rumors about the resurrection from gaining strength among the people. However, on the morning of the third day, what Caiaphas feared most occurred. The tomb was empty and news of the resurrection began to spread quickly. The women who came to the tomb were the first to witness the miraculous event, and the disciples soon became bearers of this transformative message. Caiaphas and the other religious leaders tried to cover up what happened. They bribed the soldiers to spread the story that the disciples had stolen the body while they were sleeping, Matthew 28 verses 11 to 15. This latest attempt to control the narrative only increased the power of the resurrection among those who already believed. Number 9. The effect of the resurrection on Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. The empty tomb and reports of the resurrection deeply destabilized Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. The movement they had worked so hard to eliminate was expanding with an intensity never seen before. The disciples, who had previously been fearful and hidden, began to openly proclaim the resurrection, performing signs and attracting crowds. Acts 4 verses 1 to 4 tells how Peter and John, by healing a lame man, attracted the attention of many and provoked the wrath of the religious leaders, who decided to arrest them. Despite this, around 5,000 people embraced the message proclaimed by the apostles. Caiaphas found himself faced with a situation that he could not control. He resorted to the same strategies as before: arrests, interrogations, and threats. However, every measure taken only seemed to strengthen the people's faith. The determination of the apostles in affirming that Jesus was the Messiah and declaring that they would obey God rather than men revealed the weakness of the Sanhedrin in the face of their conviction, Acts 5 verse 29. Number 10. The determination of the apostles and the vulnerability of Caiaphas. The persistence of the apostles and the strength of their preaching further highlighted the fragility of Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. They met to deliberate on Pedro and Juan, but upon seeing their firmness and the public support they received, they hesitated to impose severe penalties. In Acts 4 verses 18 to 21, the leaders ordered the apostles to stop proclaiming in the name of Jesus, but the response was firm and defiant: "We cannot stop proclaiming what we have seen and heard." With no clear alternatives, the Sanhedrin released them, fearing a popular reaction, as many glorified God for the miracle they witnessed. With each new attempt to silence Jesus' followers, Caiaphas found himself increasingly isolated. The expansion of the movement, fueled by the resurrection and the unwavering trust of the apostles, made it clear that something bigger was afoot. the unity of the Sanhedrin began to crumble, and some of its members wondered if they were dealing with something divine after all. Number 11. The wrath of Caiaphas and the unstoppable advance of the Christian message. As the days passed, Caiaphas' irritation increased. He, who had once symbolized unquestionable authority, now saw his power dissipate like grains of sand in a storm. The apostles persisted in going against their orders, preaching fervently and performing miraculous feats that attracted even more people to the new faith. Acts 5 verses 17 to 20 tells how Caiaphas, overcome by envy, ordered the apostles to be imprisoned. However, that same night, an angel of the Lord freed them and ordered them to continue proclaiming the message in the temple. This supernatural intervention only solidified the people's belief, as Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin searched in vain for ways to regain control of the situation. With each new extraordinary feat and each converted soul, the movement expanded, transforming Jerusalem into fertile soil for the spread of the Christian faith. Despite all his determined efforts, Caiaphas realized, with increasing despair, that he could not stop this current that was advancing with irresistible force. Number 12. The irremediable fall of Caiaphas' power. Caiaphas, who had once embodied the strength of a revered and feared leadership, now saw his rule crumble before his eyes. The decisions he had made, believing they safeguarded the political and religious stability of Jerusalem, came back to haunt him irreversibly. Acts 6 verse 7 states that the word of God spread, and the number of the disciples increased greatly in Jerusalem, and even many priests continued in the faith. For Caiaphas, this event was like a sure blow. The new belief penetrated even the most protected precincts of the Sanhedrin, demonstrating that not even the temple was safe from the changes that Jesus' message brought with it. Caiaphas' position became increasingly untenable. He found himself surrounded by an ever-expanding faith, while his influence was undermined by internal conflicts and uncertainty among religious leaders. Every moment, new people joined the movement and Caiaphas' control over events diminished irreparably. Number 13. The inevitable change in Jerusalem. Jerusalem, the metropolis that Caiaphas believed he ruled with total dominion, was now taken over by a renewing message. The streets that once only echoed with the words of religious leaders were now filled with debates about the resurrection and the teachings of Jesus. The temple, the greatest emblem of Caiaphas' power, was undergoing a metamorphosis, becoming the stage where the new belief began to germinate. Even the priests who had previously followed his orders without hesitation were beginning to reevaluate their convictions. The spiritual transformation that was unfolding in Jerusalem was beyond the reach of Caiaphas' strategies. The weight of his decisions was beginning to be felt. Every choice he made, every attempt to quell Jesus' followers, seemed, paradoxically, to fuel the movement. He saw the control he had over the city dissipate, taking with it his authority and the legacy he valued so much. Number 14. Caiaphas' battle against the new belief. As Caiaphas strove to preserve his supremacy, the movement of Jesus' followers continued to expand. With each effort to quell this emerging belief, the high priest faced increasing opposition. The apostles, full of courage and conviction, intensely spread the message of Jesus, attracting crowds thirsty for hope. The metropolis that once submitted to the power of Caiaphas was changing. The citizens, once dominated by fear of the temple's authority, began to challenge the existing system. The good news of Jesus brought renewal to many, facing the fear and repression used by religious leaders to maintain dominance. The pressure on Caiaphas became unsustainable. He watched helplessly as his influence diminished as more and more people embraced the new faith. With each accession, his supremacy over Jerusalem weakened, and he realized that he was fighting a war he could never win. Number 15. A remain of Caiaphas. Caiaphas' rule over Jerusalem was disintegrating. He, who had led with authority and transformed the temple into the symbol of his power, now found himself facing a force he could not control. Jesus' message not only challenged their influence, but also brought together people from different backgrounds into a community sustained by faith and hope. The high priest, who had previously reigned unopposed, now faced increasing opposition. His attempts to annihilate the Christian movement proved futile. Arrests, intimidation, and persecution only strengthened the resolve of Jesus' followers. Finally, Caiaphas began to understand that his battle was lost. The word of Jesus had crossed the limits of Jerusalem, reaching other cities and regions. Despite his stubbornness in preserving his authority, he could no longer deny the magnitude of the events unfolding before his eyes. Number 16. The inevitable change. Over time, Jerusalem began to transform irreversibly. The Christian movement, which Caiaphas tried so hard to suppress, was becoming a force that was redefining the future of the city. With each new promotion, the influence of the temple diminished and Caiaphas felt the weight of the decisions he had made. The apostles, full of faith and determination, continued to proclaim their message, perform signs, and attract crowds. The statements of Peter and John echoed through the streets of Jerusalem, challenging the supremacy of Caiaphas and inspiring the people to place their hope in something momentous. Meanwhile, the high priest watched without being able to react. The temple, which once represented the pinnacle of his authority, was now considered a place of redemption for those who believed in Jesus' victory over death. Caiaphas could no longer deny that the reality around him was changing and that the domain he valued so much was slipping from his hands. Number 17. Caiaphas's authority in decline. The foundations of Caiaphas' power began to crumble and his influence over the temple and the population became increasingly weaker. What was once unquestionable leadership began to be questioned by those who previously followed his orders without reservation. As the apostles grew stronger, Caiaphas faced internal and external battles. Internally, he fought against growing distrust within the Sanhedrin itself. Externally, he watched as the Christian movement expanded in ways he could no longer control. Every day new obstacles arose for the high priest. He, who had once commanded the destinies of so many with authority and confidence, now faced a force beyond his reach. The Christian movement, sustained by the belief in the resurrection, continued to gain followers, crossing the limits of Jerusalem and reaching places where Caiaphas could never influence. Number 18. The closing of an era for Caiaphas. Caiaphas' journey as a religious leader was coming to an end. He, who had played a crucial role in Jesus' condemnation, now found himself isolated and unable to control the events he himself had initiated. The Christian faith flourished rapidly, becoming a movement that transcended the limits of Jerusalem and spread throughout the Roman Empire. This new dynamic not only challenged the authority of Caiaphas, but also the religious structure he had worked so hard to preserve. Meanwhile, the apostles continued their mission of preaching, performing miracles, and attracting new followers. The message of Jesus, which Caiaphas tried to suppress, was now more powerful than ever. Number 19. Caiaphas faces the repercussions of his decisions. As time passed, it became clear that Caiaphas could not change the course of events. The resurrection of Jesus and the spread of Christianity transformed the religious landscape permanently. Caiaphas's choices, which had previously seemed calculated and certain, were now seen as the beginning of his own downfall. He, who once firmly ruled the destinies of many, now had to deal with the weight of his actions. The influence of his leadership was eclipsed by the brilliance of a growing movement, and Caiaphas became a symbol of opposition to something that could not be contained. Number 20. The legacy of Caiaphas. Although the figure of Caiaphas is associated with the betrayal and trial of Jesus, his historical relevance cannot be underestimated. He personified the ancient religious order, a system that strove to preserve its importance in the face of inevitable transformations. The fall of Caiaphas symbolized more than the end of leadership, it represented the collapse of a structure that failed to understand or adapt to the new. Christianity emerged not only as a religion, but as a force that revolutionized communities and reformed principles. The memory of Caiaphas serves as a warning about the repercussions of resisting the inevitable. His career illustrates how power, no matter how solid it may seem, can be shaken by something as essential and impactful as faith. Jesus' message continued to expand, bringing with it a cultural and spiritual transformation that permeated the ancient world. Caiaphas, who attempted to stop this movement, became part of a larger plot, a plot beyond his control. Jesus' disciples increased in number and influence, spreading a message of hope and renewal to places Caiaphas never imagined reaching. The belief he attempted to suppress became the foundation of a new era, while his own authority eroded. The narrative of Caiaphas is a reminder of how even the strongest leaders can be overcome by the power of an idea, especially when that idea is supported by faith and aspiration for change. The narrative of Caiaphas is not directed only at an individual, but at the clash between ancient and modern, between tradition and change. He played a fundamental role in events that marked the trajectory of humanity, although his name is often linked to the opposition to what he could not understand. Caiaphas's role as high priest symbolizes the effort to maintain a structure that was not prepared to face something that transcended its norms. He sought to protect what he considered sacred, but ended up encountering a force that irreversibly redirected the course of history. Caiaphas's career teaches us about the vulnerability of human power to the inevitable. Their attempt to suppress the message of Jesus only contributed to its spread, turning it into a movement that crossed eras and borders. Caiaphas is both a figure of influence and a reminder that transformation cannot be contained. His story is a warning to those who insist on resisting what is destined to happen. Did you like today's teaching? Write in the comments what your learning was or what you felt when listening to everything we shared. Your support is very important to us. Subscribe to the channel, like this video and help share this message. Thank you very much and see you in the next video.